And
we're really excited to share everything we've learned in this class so far.
We started off learning the basics of photography, composition, Photoshop, and sound in the first semester.
And then it was all about cinematography and editing in Adobe Premiere in the second semester.
We've made a lot of interesting projects this year, so let's explore some of these topics.
To start off, here's what we've learned about composition and photography. Early into our first semester, we learned about some of the basics of composition and photography. This includes rule of thirds, lighting such as key, fill, hair, soft light, and warm, cool light. We had to take pictures of people and objects that included these compositions. Here are some of the examples.
Taking a good photo is certainly a complex process, but what about what happens before getting that shot?
You're right. It's important to understand how to operate a camera before taking a picture. Here's Seb with a brief introduction on setting up a camera.
Good day. My name is Sebastian, and I'm going to show you how to set up a Canon camera. Here's what you want to do. First, you want to check if the battery is in and full. Seems like the battery isn't in. Neither is it full. So let's insert it in. So now that we have the camera in, let's see if it's on. And it is. For a better visual, let's see how the camera is with the screen. Now, for shutter speed, we have to turn this dial to the right or left. Now let's see, take a picture with flash, and perfect. Now, back to the anchors.
Now that we know what goes on before and during taking a picture, maybe we can learn something about what happens after, too.
Here's Ashley on Adobe Photoshop.
Thanks, Owen. We started working with Photoshop early on in the first semester, beginning with the Adobe in-app tutorials. We practiced skills such as working with layers, colors, and adding text to images. Occasionally, on Fridays, we do something called Freestyle Friday, where we get to practice our skills and just be creative using Photoshop. Here you can see some of the things that we created. As you can see, we got to play around with the layers, alter the colors of the images, use text, and just take advantage of the special effects of Photoshop.
Following the sections on photography and Photoshop, our Media Concepts Honors class delved into the complex world of audio. In order to capture the sounds we hear out in the real world, we learned how to utilize a device called the Tascam to retain the noise captured by microphones. We learned through experience that different types of microphones have different properties and that it is imperative to bring the correct mic for the job. The condenser microphone has a long extended head, which in turn extends its cardioid, the area around the mic that is most sensitive to sound, allowing it to capture audio from farther away in a specific direction without sacrificing the quality of the audio. The dynamic microphone is a more well-known mic, having a spherical head which in turn creates a spherical cardioid that only captures audio close to the microphone, making it useful for interviews. We use the condenser for projects that involve tracking targets with both the mic and camera, and we use the dynamic microphone for interviews and talking segments.
Thanks, Christoph. Now let's move on to the second unit of the first semester, which was all about sound.
We practiced our skills in audition and learned some of the science that goes on behind sound.
Here's me and Jay with a more in-depth explanation.
In Adobe Audition, we learned to edit out unnecessary background noise by selecting the undesired portion of audio, then deleting it. A smoother way Mr. Knowles taught us this is through noise reduction, where you capture a noise print, then adjust the settings until the audio sounds less crunchy. Once you've reviewed what has been removed, check Output Noise Only. Make sure to unclick this before pressing Apply. Now you have good audio. In multi-track mode, you can combine different voices to make one conversation, or different instruments to make one fluid piece. We also use multi-track mode to edit the length of soundtracks with the remix function.
Sound theory states that a sound is a vibration or wave going through matter and moves through compressing and decompressing. The vibration that moves the particles of matter can be a vocal cord, plucking a guitar, hitting a table, etc. As the waves move, they can enter your ear and make your eardrums vibrate. The elements of sound are timbre, pitch, duration, and intensity. Timbre is like when a flute and a violin play the same song, but they don't sound exactly the same. There's something about the timbre that's fundamentally different. Pitch depends on wavelength. A longer wavelength results in a higher pitch. And intensity in return is determined by amplitude. A larger vertical distance between the high pressure and low pressure parts cause a louder sound. And duration is exactly what it sounds like. It's how long a sound lasts. So here are some fun facts about sounds. Rocket launches can be so loud that launch pads are frequently filled with water, so the sound of takeoff is slightly muted. And Krakatoa, a volcanic eruption, was the loudest sound in recorded Earth history and was so strong that it cracked a concrete wall 300 miles away from where the eruption occurred.
Thank you, Jay and Ashley, for those very interesting segments.
Now we're going to move on to the second semester. To start off, here's Sienna on using cameras and cinematography.
When using a camera in cinematography, keep in mind composition is very important. We learned that you must make sure that your white balance is correct so your video is not unfortunate to look at. We also learned how to make sure your exposure is set to an appropriate level for the environment you're filming in. Another thing to consider when filming is the rule of thirds and also your background. Your lighting should also be aesthetically pleasing so your video turns out well. Now to Sebastian on using Premiere Pro.
Hey, so now we just learned how to use Adobe Premiere Pro, and it has been a game changer. At first, the interface seemed very intimidating, but after a few in-app tutorials, we got the hang of it. As we go to this clip right now, we can see that we added B-roll to make sure that the audience feels more immersed and feels more connected. Next, we used more lighting to make sure that not a lot of shadow are overcrowding the video, to make sure that everything is seen clearly. Next, we use lighting, as said, to make sure that the shadow is not as in. The lighting and the visual effects all contribute to the atmosphere of the video. And we can also cut and trim clips and transitions, and even do some basic color correction.
Thanks, Seb. Thanks, Seb. When working with media, you get all kinds of files that eventually you will amass a large collection. Let's go to Samara on using Google Drive and File Explorer.
So here we learned that Google Drive came to us as a very useful app in our class of media concepts because it would hold our footage and photos if needed. We would either direct it to Google Classroom or Adobe to edit the footage, and it would hold onto the footage needed forever or until we decide to delete it from the drive. We also learned how to transport photos and footage from the cameras or computers from Google Classroom. We put it in the drive with our last names and the assignment's name so it could be more organized and findable. Now on to Steven with using characteristics to tell a story.
Along with practicing and using cameras, Mr. Knowles taught us to catch characteristics and the story of what's happening on camera. Whenever recording a news segment, action piece, or documentary, it's always best to develop the characteristics of the people on camera by showing the audience what they do or how they interact with other people. For example, in a live sport event, the player high-fiving each other, players yelling, or players talking to the coaches about plays, and all gives characteristics to each player. To further capture characteristics, Mr. Knowles made us record and edit a short video on displaying characteristics in just a minute. Everything a person does is a part of their character, and it's the cameraman's job to show that. Mr. Knowles also taught us how to write stories or plot out stories by the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a plot structure that we would use to identify whose archetypes fit. The hero's journey is any form of media. And for example, in the sport, the home team could be the heroes in someone else's story, but they could also be the villain as well. Mr. Knowles taught us everything we needed to know and practice our storytelling, and it proved to be advantageous and helpful all around. Now here's Owen on using B-roll and sequences when editing.
We learned about B-roll and sequences. It is a widely used filming technique which footage is played over audio of something that isn't being shown. B-roll is typically used as background footage for interviews, establishing shots, or transitions. In fact, if you watch any TV show or movie, you'll see B-roll. B-roll is a very useful tool that serves many different purposes, such as keeping the watcher's attention or building your world and story. An example is the video we showed earlier during the Adobe Premiere segment.
Thanks, Owen. Now that we know a little more about working with cameras and footage, let's explore writing scripts and interviews, which are important parts of producing media. But first, here's Jay with a quick recap on tripods and how to use them.
Pass me the tripod. All right. During live sporting events, the tripods are stationed at the left, right, and center of the bleachers to get all angles of the event. I'm going to set one up right now, but while we're doing that, here's Seb with how to set up an interview.
Recently, we learned how to write script in cinema and do interviews. But how does someone write a script for cinemas? Well, writers have a setting, characters, plot, dialogue, and an action. This will keep the film from being bland and uninteresting to the audience. For interviews, people are interviewed about topics and people must try their best to answer and to refrain from saying certain words such as and a lot others. Now, interviews are mainly used for documentaries or other news broadcasts, and the scripts are mainly used for the films. Now, back to Jay with the cameras for the live sports events. But first, we wanted to know, how do we do the films? Well, films can be a lot harder because people have to undergo a lot of construction and a lot of instructions to see how does the script work. Even a single failure, even a single downfall or a single error can mean that the whole script is a mess. But how do we know? Well, we can see that in movies such as Avengers Endgame or Avengers Infinity War, that the scripts has been carefully and very scrutinized and very nitpicked. Now, here's Jay for the live sports events.
All right, here's the full setup, making sure that the camera is balanced properly on top of the tripod. On the stairs, we learned to follow the 2-to-1 ratio, with 2 legs being on the lower stair while 1 would be on the upper stair so that the camera stays balanced. During events, we learned to be quick with zooming with your right hand and focusing with your left hand. The camera should follow the ball, but also tell a story by showing the reactions of players and sometimes the coach.
And that concludes our Media Concepts Final. We hope you enjoyed watching and learning everything we learned this year.
We hope we have impressed Mr. Knowles enough to get a good grade. That's all. Thank you and goodbye.